We are live.
We are live. Okay, it is Tuesday, March 28th, 29th. Brian, get the right number of fingers up there for me. 29th, and this is Senate Government Operations. And we're scheduled to start at 1:15, but we had a couple amendments that we wanted to hear. So I asked people to come a little bit early so we could hear these amendments. So Tucker, these are amendments that came to us on S-181 from they were suggestions that came from the floor.
Yeah.
And so Tucker, if you want to walk us through these.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. You have in front of you a proposed amendment to S-181. It has 3 instances of amendment, 2 of which can group around the general theme of expanding or reducing the membership of various appropriate municipal panels. The first instance of amendment was the proposal that was discussed on the floor by Senator Nitka, and that was changing Section 8 of the bill, which amended 24 VSA Section 4460, to clarify that in the case that the number of members on a board, these are the zoning boards of adjustment, development review boards, is reduced, that the legislative body shall use a lottery system to determine the members that remain in office. In the underlying bill, the legislative body had the authority to choose directly the members that would stay in office.
And the fear was that they would just kick off the people whose ideas they didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anthony.
What does the lottery system mean?
Yeah.
And what is it?
Is that pulling straws?
Right, so I mean, pick a number from 1 to 10. Closest is 5 wins or something.
Those both sound like lottery systems.
Would you name it? Put the names in the hat.
That's true.
They're all, those are all lotteries.
Those are all lottery systems. There's no legal definition here, so whatever is generally understood as a lottery system would qualify. That could be using a ticket-based system, which is the most common lottery-based. Write your name on a piece of paper. We're going to put it in the bingo shuffler and pull it out.
Or in a hat.
I guess it's fair. It's fair to everybody. It's equally fair, I guess.
There may also be volunteers who want to leave and you don't have to go through that.
Right.
That's true.
Right.
So it shall use is a little bit of a problem for me, because what if there are, I mean, for me, it would be, if no one volunteers to depart, then I'm sorry.
No, they should have the ability to resign.
Sure, they can resign, but if you reduce it from 7 to 4, you're gonna have 3 people. It's probably unlikely that 3 people will. You'll have to come down to number 4. You'll have to come down to 4 somehow. And the way they're gonna come down to 4 is through a lottery system. And I don't think anybody is gonna say, you can't resign, your name has to be in the hat.
Right.
To clarify some of this, there's already a range that's permitted to exist, and removal is already an authority specific to these offices that the legislative body has. This is going to be in those instances where the town is voting to expand or reduce outside of that statutory window.
Yeah.
3 to 9, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
The second instance of amendment picks up on this and expands it to planning commissions. So you'll notice that in the planning commission statute, 24 VSA section 4322, governing the membership of planning commissions. The existing law, the commission has 3 to 9 voting members. By default, this is an appointed board, and again, the appointment and removal power belongs to the legislative body. And then there is a provision where a town can opt to have elected board members. So that's the background you need to know for this. In subsection C, we have this is all of the new language contained within the amendment. First, notwithstanding subsection A, and that's a subsection that deals with the number of members on the board and their appointment. First, that for an appointed planning commission, the legislative body may change the number of members that may be appointed to the commission. So the appointed board, legislative body just has authority to change the number of members. Two, for an elected planning commission, the municipality may vote at an annual or special meeting to change the number of members that may be elected to the commission. So for your appointed boards, authority stays with the legislative body. They have the ability to go outside of that 3 to 9 window if that's what they would like to do. For elected commissions, then the town has to have a vote to either expand or reduce outside of that window of 3 to 9. Subsection D is the procedural requirement here, again, bringing in the concern from Senator Nick on the floor. This notwithstands subsection 4323C of the subchapter, and that is the subchapter that deals with all of the requirements for elected boards specifically. If the number of members on an appointed or elected planning commission is reduced, the legislative body is going to use a lottery system to determine the members that remain in office. And I'll flag here that appointed is bundled there. And again, this is an instance where there was existing authority within that 3 to 9 window for the legislative body to appoint or remove. The lottery is now coming in for the expansion or reduction outside of that 3 to 9 window.
My guess is that very few towns will use that because 3 to 9 is already a pretty broad.
Yeah.
And I would, and the reason this came up is because in South Burlington, it says in their charter that they should have 9. It says they wanted to, I think the way Thomas said, they wanted to have fewer than 9, but they can't because in their charter it says 9. So if this is in here, they can then use this instead of their charter.
Okay.
And they won't have to go through a big charter change.
And we're adding this to a section that dealt not with planning commissions, but with other.
Planning commission.
So if you go up, this is a whole new section of the bill.
This is a whole new section.
Section 8A.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because he said, well, but it was in DRBs or something, right? Because he raised it. Didn't he raise it because of the DRBs?
Yes, the DRB and zoning board of adjustment section is staying in, that's section 8. And the second instance of amendment is adding this new section 8A, which deals with the planning commissions.
Right. That's.
The last instance of amendment to quickly cover is that when we were putting together the report of the hardworking Senate Government Operations Committee, there was a duplicate section. Sections 9 and 12 were the exact same thing. So this deletes that section 12 because it's a duplication of section 9.
Maybe we were just trying to be certain.
Yeah. No, I mentioned it on the floor that it was duplicate.
So I have a quick
So I'm
question.
glad we're able to take care of it
Okay,
here.
Anthony?
So the planning commission is not the legislative body. So
No.
in terms of carrying out the lottery, this is a real detailed thing, who's gonna carry it. So it's actually the select board that would carry out the
Yeah.
lottery, not the planning commission.
Yes.
Or in the case of the DRB or
Right.
any other board, would be the select board.
And we're not, how do we refer to like other commissions? If this is the planning commission, we're talking planning commission, DRB. What about the cemetery commission or something like that? Is there the same kind of idea?
I'm actually not certain what the specific membership requirements are for some of these other boards.
Maybe
but
no,
they're not-
I'm not saying anybody will bring it up, I was just curious.
I think Gwen can answer that, but I think that we don't specify in statute how many members the cemetery commission or the library board or those can have. Gwen?
Generally speaking, if there is specification, let's say like a select board, 3 members, 5 members, those sorts of things. If, let's say there's a select board that has 5 members and they vote to go back to having 3 members, because all of the terms are tracked, whoever has those 2 seats that were added, whether it's a 2 or 3-year term or however it winds up being, those are automatically the ones that are not, like that's taken care of just by the fact that they hold those 2 extra seats. So they're tracking those seats the minute they make that decision. And then for other appointed, for non-elected, for appointed position, depending on the board, and it's different for everyone, they serve at the pleasure of the legislative body, generally speaking. So they can be removed based off of what the legislature wants to do. So there's not one size fits all, because every commission's a little bit different. Like, for example, for the planning commission, since we're talking about the planning commission, in order to remove someone from the planning commission, there is language there that says, and that's between the 3 and 9 range, there has to be a unanimous vote of the legislative body. So even then, there's like a little bit of variation for how removals are, because it can't be just a majority vote. It has to be unanimous, at least in terms of a planning commission.
But I think Anthony's question was, why aren't we doing this for all of those boards and stuff in the towns? And my understanding was that we don't specify in law how many people you have to have on your library board or your cemetery commission or those other boards. Those are
sometimes, yeah. I could just say from VLCT's perspective, the reason we chose planning commissions, DRBs, like basically the zoning ones, are the ones that we hear the most from our members, that they want more ability to change the numbers, like particularly if they're doing a massive overhaul on their subdivision regulations, zoning regulations, or if they're under the clock trying to re-up their town plan before it expires. It might make sense to have more people on their commissions for those instances, but also towns that have problems filling those positions, they wanted the reduction. So at least from our perspective, we only asked for this in this range because that's just what we heard from members.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Is everybody okay with this?
Yep, okay.
Who wants to offer the amendment? You can put it from Clarkson and the rest of us?
Sure.
Okay. Right?
Yeah, it has to be from individuals, right?
Right.
So Gail, I will make that draft 2.2 from the individual members. And would you like me to wait to get confirmation for each of you, or just?
I don't think so. I think we're all okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know where Keisha is.
That's what I was
Well,
getting at.
no, because I think we want this done.
I know, so just from the 4 of us.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think what Tucker was.
Oh,
And I should list each of the members, each of the 4 of you as
well, he'll write that on the top of the
okay.
amendment, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That'll be draft
Yeah.
2.2.
We need to vote that now or not?
No, because
We can.
Well, we're offering it.
we're offering the amendment. We don't need to vote for it. We're all offering the amendment.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
okay. Thank you, Tucker. Now, Tucker, would you like to finish
Thank you,
walking
Tucker.
us through Essex? You aren't with us very often, are you, Representative Dolan?
No.
Have you been in here before with us ever? I don't think you have.
On Zoom before.
No.
Happy to be
Lori is here on
Well,
Zoom.
We swapped this time.
Well,
Hi,
welcome.
everyone.
Are you okay?
I am. I just have a bad head cold, so thought it best to not spread my germs.
Oh, how thoughtful of you.
Okay. Would you like to continue? I think, I'm trying to remember exactly where we ended, where my folds end, I suppose. I have,
We left off just before subchapter 6, which deals with the city manager.
oh, that's right, that's right. Yes, on page 14, yes. Yes, thank you.
Oh, this isn't quite as long as Springfield's, but close.
Well, but this is a brand new charter.
It is,
Yes, okay.
so very restrained.
So would you like to start us walking through?
Yes, so you have in front of you H491. We'll start on page 14 with subchapter 6 to pick up where we left off last time. And as a brief reminder, based on Senator Clarkson's most recent comment, although this is a charter for a brand new city, the majority of the bill that you have in front of you is taken directly from the existing Village of Essex Junction charter.
Oh, okay, great.
There's quite a bit in here that is currently codified in Title 24 Act for the village. Subchapter 6 broadly deals with the city manager. Section 601 states that the city council shall appoint the city manager. Section 602 starts to deal with the powers and duties of the manager. It states generally that the manager will be the chief administrative officer of the city and be responsible to the council for the administration of the city's affairs. Subsection B deals with some of the specific powers of the manager. The manager has the power to appoint and, when it is deemed necessary, suspend or remove all city employees, including the treasurer and other employees that are provided by this charter. Those are for cause removals under these terms. Additionally, well, unless a CBA applies to that specific officer or employee, collective bargaining agreement. That's an important caveat that they
Right here.
The manager is given authority to authorize any employee underneath the manager's direction and supervision to exercise the same powers with respect to subordinate employees within the particular office within the city. The appointments, layoffs, suspensions, promotions, or removals need to be made primarily on the basis of training, experience, fitness, and performance of duties. So essentially a catch-all clause saying that these need to comply with employment law generally. The manager under subsection C shall direct and supervise the administration of all departments, offices, and agencies of the city unless there's a more specific provision within the charter. The manager recommends the hiring of the city attorney with the council's approval. The member or a staff member designated by the manager shall attend all council meetings and shall have the right to take part in discussion and recommendations, but does not have voting rights. So an ex officio member of sorts. The council in subsection E is given authority to meet in executive session without the manager for discussion of the manager's performance, or if the manager is subject to the investigation powers that the council is reserved under the terms of the charter. The manager is tasked with seeing that all laws subject to enforcement by the manager or his office are faithfully executed, and is required to prepare and submit the annual budget and capital program to the city council. The manager is also required to submit to the council a complete report on the finances and administrative activities of the city as of the end of each fiscal year. The manager has other reporting duties and shall make other reports as the council directs and requires. The manager is tasked under subsection J with keeping the council fully advised on the financial condition and needs of the city and to make recommendations to the council concerning the affairs of the city as the manager deems desirable. The manager is tasked with being responsible for all of the city's ordinances and laws. So this is the chief enforcement officer as well as the chief administrative officer. The manager may, discretionary authority, delegate to subordinate officers and employees any duties that are conferred upon the manager by the charter or by general law. The manager is tasked with performing other duties specified in the charter or as required by the council in general, as we're moving through all of these, the manager has duties to oversee the operation of city government, day-to-day operation. The manager fixes the compensation of city employees, recommends the appointment of the city clerk with the council's approval. City council has the authority under section 603 of the charter, from page 17 now. The council can remove the manager from office for cause. The council is required to adopt by an affirmative majority vote a preliminary resolution that states the reasons for the removal, and may suspend the manager from duty for a period up to 45 days. Within 3 days after the vote, a copy of the resolution is provided to the manager.
There should be a folder there.
Oh,
Says
okay.
city.
We're like too organized. Okay. Great. Thank you, Dale.
Yeah, and we're on page 7.
Okay, thank you.
So within 3 days after the vote to remove or suspend, the resolution has to be delivered to the manager. And then within 5 days after receipt of the resolution, the manager can file with the council a written request for a hearing, which shall be in a public or executive session by choice of the manager. The hearings are held at a special council meeting within 15 to 30 days of the manager's request for the hearing, and the manager has authority here to file a written reply to the removal or suspension. Council has authority in subdivision 3 to adopt a final resolution of removal, which can be made immediately effective by majority vote. All right. Section 604, we're on page 18 now, at least in my unofficial and White House version. Deals with vacancies in the office of the city manager. The manager has authority under the section to appoint a staff member to perform the manager's duties in the event of absence due to disability, incapacitation, or vacation, unless the manager has previously appointed a staff member as assistant manager or deputy manager. If the manager has failed to make any of those designations, the council can, by resolution, appoint an interim manager. We're now on subchapter 7, dealing with boards and commissions. Still on page 18.
Our favorite.
Yes, a frequent topic for this committee. These are boards and commissions of the city of Essex Junction. Section 701 establishes the Board of Civil Authority and ties it to general law. Section 702 establishes the Board of Payment of Taxes. Again, echoes general law. Section 703 establishes the Planning Commission, the powers, duties, and obligations of which are in accordance with general law. So you just potentially approved an amendment that would impact this. Members of the Planning Commission are not permitted to hold any other city office, an important component of Section 703. And the City Council is given authority in the charter to set the terms of the Planning Commission members. An important note, because we just went over it, is that if the city has elected planning commissions, that this would override the general law statutory authority for the voters to vote on and set the terms of elected commission members. All right.
Is it common?
Presumed to.
Is it common to say hold no other office? Like they can't be a justice of the peace. They can't do anything else.
It depends on the particular municipality that we're working with, but I would say that many municipal charters do have their own conflict of interest policies that prohibit officers from holding more than one office. This charter, we went over one of them, does have other prohibitions, conflict of interest policies specific to city council members that we already went over. So there's a few different prohibitions built into the city's charter. Section 704 deals with the DRB, the Development Review Board. It establishes the DRB and ties it to the general law. Members of the DRB will be appointed by the council for 3-year terms. Section 705 deals with the Brownell Library trustees. The Brownell Library Board of Trustees that hold office at the time this charter is enacted shall serve until their terms are completed. So this is being codified, but that's almost like a transitional provision there. Any existing policies that are in place for the trustees will continue after the effective date of the charter. The 5 permanent self-perpetuating trustees shall function in accordance with the terms of the trust agreement dated May 25th, 1925. The trustee shall have the authority to establish new policies for the operation of the library or replace any existing policy in place. The library, notwithstanding any of the foregoing, is required to follow financial and personnel policies that are established by the city council. Subchapter 8, the administrative departments of the city. Section 801 deals with personnel administration and benefits. The manager or an appointee acts as the personnel director. It's on page 20, by the way. The manager maintains personnel rules and regulations. Those rules and regulations must be approved by the council and shall include the procedure for amending those rules and regulations. Each employee is required to receive a copy of the rules and regulations upon hire. The rules and regulations may deal with the following subjects related to personnel administration: job classification, jobs to be filled, tenure, retirement, pensions, leave of absence, vacations, holidays, group insurance, salary plans, your general enumerated and exhaustive list of employment-related and HR-related provisions. Subsection C, no person in the service of the city shall either directly or indirectly give, render, pay, or receive any service or other valuable thing on account of or in connection with any appointment, proposed appointment, promotion, or proposed promotion.
That's our whole conflict of interest section.
I summarized it much more briefly than we did.
Section 802, the real estate assessor, very similar to the assessor statutes. There shall be either a real estate assessor who is a certified real estate appraiser or an independent appraisal firm headed by a certified real estate appraiser, appointed by the manager, that shall carry out the duties of the assessor and function in the same way as assessors under general law. The real estate assessor is tasked with establishing the grand list of the city and following the general law that applies thereto. Under Section 803, appraisals shall be reviewed periodically and kept up to date. This provision would be overlapped and overlaid by the Title 32 provisions that, when triggered, would require reappraisal. Appraisal of business property for tax purposes. The appraisal of business personal property shall be in accordance with general law, provided that all business personal property acquired by a taxpayer after September 30th, 1995 shall be exempt from tax. Most of these business personal property taxes that are in charters have been slowly repealed over the last 5 to 10 years, including the Springfield charter that was on the Senate floor today. They have repealed their personal tax, personal property tax, which expired in 2001. Section 805 explains some of the purpose of appointing that real estate assessor. The purpose of appointing an assessor is in lieu of the election of listers. So what this section is setting up is that if any general law were to apply to require the election of listers, that the city is instead going to have this city assessor in lieu of the listers.
I'm sorry, could you, business property, sure, appraisal of business property, is that what you used to call the inventory tax?
Yes, yes.
So I don't understand why it says that it shall be dealt with by these provisions, but, so anything that was there before 1995 does have a tax on it?
Yes,
An inventory
or
tax?
could have the tax applied to it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know from previous discussions of city operations or current village operations if there is any inventory tax being applied.
Okay.
But under this legal mechanism, anything acquired before that date in 1995 would be subject to the tax, and the procedures would be those that are in general law.
We did away with ours because we were told that on March 31st, this farmer had all his cows over here in a different town because it was right on the border. And then on April 1st, he moved them back to Putney because
Because he would have been taxed on it.
because he would have been taxed on them
Right.
if they were. So, I mean, that was one of the reasons, but we did away with it. All right. Okay.
Chapter 9 deals with the city's budget process. Section 901 states that the fiscal year starts and ends on the first day of July. That's similar to most other municipalities in the state, with very few exceptions. Section 902, the annual municipal budget. The manager submits to the council a budget for review before the annual city meeting, and that budget contains an estimate of the financial condition of the city, an itemized statement of appropriations recommended for current expenses and capital improvements during the next fiscal year, an itemized statement of estimated revenues from all sources other than taxation for the next fiscal year, and comparative figures of tax and other sources of revenue for the current and immediately preceding tax years. A capital budget for not fewer than the next 5 fiscal years showing anticipated expenditures, and any other information that the council requires as a component of that budget report. The city council then reviews and approves the recommended budget under section 903. They can make changes. The budget is published not later than 2 weeks after its preliminary adoption by the council, and then the council shall fix the time and place for a public hearing on the budget, and they'll give notice of that hearing, which moves immediately into section 904, dealing with the warning for the budget meeting. The council holds at least one public hearing at least 30 days prior to the annual meeting to present and explain the proposed budget. The manager, not less than 30 days prior to the annual meeting, makes available the city council's recommended budget and the final warning of the pending annual meeting. The annual city report shall be made available to the legal voters of the city not later than 10 days prior to the annual meeting. Section 905, appropriations and transfers. An annual budget shall be adopted by the city at the city meeting by the vote of the majority of eligible voters. They vote by Australian ballot in accordance with section 401. If after the total budget has been appropriated, the city council finds additional appropriations are necessary, the appropriations shall be made and reported at the next city meeting as a specific item. The appropriations shall only be made in special circumstances or situations of an emergency nature. However, no specific explanation needs to be given for any normal annual operating expense in any office or agency that may be increased over the budget by an amount not more than 10% of the office's or agency's budget. From the effective date of the budget, as approved by voters, the amounts that are stated therein become appropriated to various agencies of city government. The manager may at any time transfer unencumbered appropriation balances or portions thereof between general classifications of expenditures. At the request of the manager, the council may by resolution transfer any of those unencumbered appropriation balances within the council budget from one department, office, or agency into another. And again, to bring this all together, charters are harmonized with general law. So for example, the recent repeal that you included in S-181 of the prohibition on the commingling of town highway funds would come into play here. So within the city manager would be able to commingle those funds. Notwithstanding.
Tom, I'm gonna ask you to wait, our maximum here is 8.
Oh, I do apologize. I'll pop back in again.
That's okay.
Minutes or so.
I know.
I didn't count the amount of people in here.
I wasn't,
You should put the sign on the outside of this.
I can do that.
Notwithstanding what we just walked through with the ability to move unencumbered balances around, no unexpended balance in any appropriation that is not included in the council budget shall be transferred or used for any other purpose. All right. Section 906 states that upon the passage of the budget, the amounts that are stated therein shall be raised by taxes in the city in the corresponding tax year, and that those taxes will be levied on the grant list. So same as operation under general law. Subchapter 10 deals with taxation. Section 1001, taxes on real property shall be paid in equal installments on March 15th and September 15th. Notice is required to be sent to the taxpayers not less than 30 days prior to when the taxes are due. Section 1002, city is going to add an additional charge of 8% to any tax not paid on or before the date specified in the preceding section. As you may recall from some of the work during COVID, in some of the emergency powers, the interest that is applied to unpaid taxes is not automatic, and it's usually based on a municipal vote to apply a certain percentage. 8% is the maximum amount that is applied under the general. Yes.
It doesn't say who will be responsible for collecting that. Is there a tax collector or something?
There is nothing specific within the charter, so that would fall to either the collector of delinquent taxes or the treasurer, depending on the system that the current village and future city has in place. It is likely a collector of delinquent taxes unless that office has been eliminated.
Yeah, the treasurer tends to these days do all that.
We'll also, there are some temporary provisions that will be in place for the city that we'll get to at the end of the bill about the collection of taxes and how that's going to carry out in the near future as the town and city separate. Section 1003. This section was amended by the House Ways and Means Committee to add a clause.
So may I just, while we're on section 1002, on the penalty, does this not give the manager or the select board any opportunity to negotiate 8%, because it says shall?
8%, that's what they wanted.
Okay.
And
So
I,
no interest in allowing any.
Right.
Okay.
I can put together a summary, because what this is doing is saying specifically for the city that the 8% interest rate is in place.
Yes.
The general law fills in all the gaps around, for example, how an abatement might play out for an individual
Right.
taxpayer. And I can send you a summary of how that works.
Okay, as long as there's some provision for that, that's great.
Well, there would be for an abatement, but not for reducing the 8%. That's just different.
The rate is equally applied.
Right, it's pretty tough and there are extenuating.
Well,
Yeah.
but I don't think we,
Yeah,
that's
that's
their
fine, they can
decision.
deal with it.
We've had that fight in here for the 20 years I've been here.
So section 1003 authorizes the city council to negotiate and execute assessment and taxation agreements between the city and the taxpayer or a group of taxpayers. These are the tax stabilization agreements that are generally authorized under general law. There are specific types of properties that are subject to these agreements under general law. Here, the city has authority to negotiate and execute these assessment and taxation agreements with any taxpayer within the city. This next component was added by House Ways and Means. It says that this section shall not be construed to supersede any provision of state law related to the education property tax. Subchapter 11, capital improvements. Section 1101 deals with the capital programs of the city. The manager is tasked with preparing the capital program at least 3 days before the final submission of the budget. The capital program has to include a clear general summary of the program's contents, a list of all capital improvements that are proposed to be undertaken for the next 5 fiscal years, cost estimates, methods of financing, and recommended time schedules for each improvement, the estimated annual cost of operating and maintaining the facilities that will be constructed or acquired. Finally, under subsection C, the information that's required by the section can be revised and extended each year with regard to the capital improvements that are still pending. Subchapter 12, amendment of the charter and initiatives. This charter may be amended in accordance with general law. That's all in subchapter 12. Subchapter 13, general provisions. I quickly moving through the first two, savings clause and separability. These are boilerplate provisions that we see in a lot of charters, essentially saying that if one section of the charter is found to be invalid, it doesn't invalidate the remaining sections. Section 1303. This has superseding language. It states that the city shall be formed notwithstanding language that is contained in the town of Essex charter. So the following language specifically, that notwithstanding the provisions of any other municipal charters, territory within the corporate limits of the town shall not be annexed to or become a part of any other municipal corporation, except by the annexation procedures as set forth in the statutes of the state of Vermont. This refers to the annexation procedures for incorporated villages. So essentially what the town of Essex charter says is that no incorporated villages can extend their boundaries or take new territory unless they follow the general law procedures for annexing territory. And here the city is including this in the charter to ensure that the General Assembly is saying that that town charter provision is not going to be construed to prohibit the formation of the city.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay.
We get into next the transitional provisions that will govern the period immediately following the formation of the city in July and the formal separation of the two municipalities. Section 3 governs the assignment and assumption of village assets and liabilities. It states that all assets and obligation that formerly belonged to the village will pass to the city. And that includes all interests. So all real property easements, rights and interests in land, vehicles, equipment, other personal property, cash, insurance policies, documents and records, debts, claims, bonded indebtedness. All contracts, agreements, trusts, and other binding written documents obligating the village shall remain in effect. And what's happening here is this section is setting out that all of the legal duties and responsibilities that the village had with their financial or other relationships will pass to this new corporate entity that's being formed. And these are included within these sort of handshakes when you have a corporation becoming something new, to make sure that creditors don't lose out because they can no longer hold the extinguished corporation liable to debt. Section 4 sets out the transition period. It establishes a transition period that will begin on July 1st, 2022, and it will end on July 1st, 2023. During that transition period, the city shall continue to receive and pay for consolidated services with the town for assessing, the clerk treasurer position, IT, police, public works, and stormwater. So those are the enumerated services that will continue to be shared and paid for. The city council shall set a tax rate and collect taxes to meet the obligations for the city's share of the town municipal operations and all of the city municipal operations throughout the transition period, according to the budgets that are approved by the voters of the town and the village the previous March and April. The taxes that are collected by the city for the town shall be paid to the town in equal installments on October 15th and April 15th. And then this states that at the end of the transition period, the city shall be fully organized. I don't know if that's aspirational or not.
I think it's probably very manageable, given one is morphing into the other.
What were the dates of the new payments? Oh, March and September. Okay.
All right.
A month ahead of these 2 days.
Section 5 contains a transitional provision for the organizational meeting of the city. The first annual city meeting shall occur on the date set by the voters at the most recent village annual meeting, following approval of the charter. This will be a meeting of the city of Essex Junction and will be noticed and warned to all residents of the city. And it will be for the purposes of presenting and discussing the budget only. Other city business may also be presented and discussed, but not voted on at that initial meeting. After presentation and discussion of the budget and any other business, the meeting will adjourn. Voting on the budget and the election of councilors will be by Australian ballot. Section 6, transitional provision related to the village center and neighborhood development area designations. So those village center district and neighborhood development area designations, as contained within the current Essex Junction Land Development Code, shall continue in the new city for the purposes of continuing downtown revitalization efforts. And the city shall retain any and all state designations for purposes of redevelopment in force at the time of adoption. So this is the handshake for these designation areas between the village and the city. Section 7 deals with the transitional provision for the governing body of this corporate entity. When the charter becomes effective and the city is established, following approval by the legislature, the members of the village board of trustees will become the members of the city council and continue to serve out their elected terms. The president, vice president, and clerk of the council will continue to serve in those capacities until the board reorganizes, as we covered earlier in the bill, where they'll elect their own president. The councilors shall warn and hold meetings as appropriate, and shall address all details and issues related to the transition from the village to the city. City council shall review, consider, and adopt all regulations, ordinances, and plans for the former village as its own. So that's the regulatory handshake. The city council, with the assistance of the manager, shall propose and warn the first annual budget of the new city for consideration by the voters at its first annual meeting. Section 8 contains the transitional provision for budget and administration. City manager is tasked with proposing the budget for the new city for the next fiscal year that addresses proper service levels, contractual obligations, capital projects, debt, and that reflects any changes related to the incorporation of the city. Section 9, separation of the city and town departments. No more commingling of city and town departments. The city council is going to employ a city manager, and the manager shall plan and hire for the separation of all consolidated departments within the town by the end of the transition period, unless contracts are signed stating otherwise. And I think there may be some factual information that's given to you all about those contracts that are going to stay in place. Section 10 deals with planning and development. So when the charter becomes effective, the former village plan, bylaws, and land development code, and any ordinances that are related to planning and development will remain in effect until amended or revised by the new city council. The village planning commission and village zoning board of adjustment will become the planning commission and development review board of the city. All current trustee and appointed commission and committee members shall serve out the remainder of their terms through this transition. Section 12, the unification and adoption of ordinances, bylaws, and rules. All ordinances and bylaws of the village shall become ordinances and bylaws of the city. The city is fully authorized to amend or repeal any ordinance according to the provisions of subchapter 5 of the charter dealing with ordinances. Whenever a power is granted by any ordinance or bylaw to an officer or officers of the village, it will carry over to those same officers in the city. Section 13, personnel. All employees of the village shall become employees of the city, and any and all contracts of the village will be assumed by the city unless otherwise terminated, re-executed, or renegotiated. Personnel policies will carry from the village to the city as well. The dates of hire with the village will be used as the dates of hire for purposes of benefits and benefit calculations for the city. Section 14 deals with the transition of finances. The city shall adopt any and all portions of the town of Essex grand list for properties located within the borders of the city. Any and all property tax payments due and delinquencies incurred for the village prior to the effective date of the charter shall be paid to town. Upon the effective date of the charter, any city taxes due and delinquencies incurred shall be payable to the city. So that July 1st, 2022 effective date is the delineation between taxes that will be due to the town, that will be collected and remitted to the town, and then taxes that will be collected and remitted to the city. All existing contractual agreements, including those tax stabilization agreements that we covered 10 minutes or so ago, within the village shall hereby be assigned to the city. Section 15, the Future Governance Commission. Within 3 years after the effective date of the charter, the council is going to appoint a special commission to study governance considerations, including the form of government, the election of officials at large or through wards, governing body composition, terms of office, term limits, and councillor compensation. Section 16. This is a component that was added in the House to deal with the very particular position of justices of the peace.
With the governor appointing them?
That is how it operates under general law.
You're kidding.
No.
I thought they were elected.
Well, they are elected by the municipality that they serve, and that's a component of the Vermont Constitution. And whenever there's an absence under general law, and it's cited there, 17 VSA 2623, the governor appoints the replacement, and the parties at the local level make recommendations for who the governor should appoint to that open JP position. So here, it states expressly that the governor may appoint up to 15 justices of the peace to serve in the city. Because of course, this city is a new municipal corporation, will not have had a general election to elect a justice of the peace, or justices of the peace, excuse me. So the governor will appoint up to 15 pursuant to the procedures established in Title 17. The committees for the political parties of the JPs in the town may submit recommendations for qualified justices of the peace to the governor for consideration. So that's a component of the general law. And because the city does not have any currently elected JPs for that municipal corporation, this is going to override that general law procedure and say, well, the committees for the JPs in the town will be the ones that will make the recommendation, because all of those justices of the peace in the town formerly served for the village as well. The appointed justices of the peace shall serve until successors may be elected at the 2022 general election. And that is a 4-month term, potentially, if the governor acts very quickly after the effective date of this charter. Section 17 repeals the village charter. Section 18 sets the effective date of this act as July 1st, 2022.
Very exciting. Great.
Karen?
If I can share one update that has come up. I appreciate the timing that you've had of this meeting, because as was heard, there's the transition plans for a lot of the different things between the village and the town. And they just had a meeting last night with both municipalities. The boards met and both unanimously passed the agreements of how those things are going to transition pending attorney review. So that is positive as well.
Great, good. Good. Any questions or concerns?
I have a thought. It's a question, I guess. It seems like the transitional things, I mean, I understand why they're in there, but the charter is going to go on forever, and these transitional things are still going to be in there. It just seems like they take up space.
The transitional provisions are not codified.
Okay.
They are section
They're
law that
section.
are dealing with the transitional period for the next year.
So they'll disappear.
Well, they won't
Not
disappear.
disappear, but-
They'll be kept in the 2022 acts and resolves, which are kept in each attorney's office and the Office of Legislative Counsel,
So
are
it's going to
published
disappear.
by the Secretary of State, and are likely mostly used by Michael Chernick in historical research.
So I will say that we've had a couple emails I have from a couple people who live in the town and are very upset that this is happening and that they didn't have the ability to vote on this. But this isn't a town issue. This is the village seceding from the town. And if Vermont decided to secede from the union, I think that we would vote on it, but we wouldn't let Massachusetts and Connecticut vote on that for us. So I think that's
a good comparison.
It is a good analogy. I hadn't thought of that.
This issue did come up in the House, and I did a great deal of historical research around what has happened when other new municipalities have formed from a separation between municipal governments. And the way that this has shaken out is that when the new municipality does not contain any real property from the surrounding municipality, then there's no vote in the surrounding municipality. And the most recent example is the city of Winooski. The village of Winooski voted to separate, and the town of Colchester was not given the opportunity to vote on the separation. It was just the village itself. There is a similar situation for the formation of the city of Burlington, because the town of Burlington at the time, as it was constituted, and there was a very small piece that ended up becoming South Burlington, voted in its entirety without taking up any of those outside pieces to become the city. In other instances, and these are all recent proposals that failed, the town of St. Johnsbury was allowed to vote on the formation of the city of St. Johnsbury because it included the village, but also 2 incorporated school districts that were within the town. That is not the case here, where the village within its current corporate boundaries voted to become a city without taking or incorporating anything outside of the village boundaries. And again, the consideration is, were the voters of that municipal entity given an opportunity to vote on becoming this new corporate entity? And in the case of Winooski and this present case, the answer would be yes, because the bounds are all within the village.
Well, that answers that. So, does anybody have any questions or concerns, or are we ready to? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We mentioned departments that would be still shared, if that's the right verb. Can I just get a sense of what those might be?
Highway?
Yes, but you may want to hear from the representatives from Essex, because I believe they have the most recent updated list. And again, those will be subject to an agreement executed between the 2 municipalities, which I believe is what Representative Dolan just brought up.
Thank you.
Representative Dolan, Essex Junction. Yeah, so that's the piece that I was sharing before, that there's an MOU that is being worked on between the village and the town. And that's what was passed unanimously by both municipalities last night, pending, attorney review, just checking that all the I's and T's are crossed. And some of the services that are in that are, there's a delinquent tax agreement, there's the information technology agreement, police services, assessor services, stormwater, clerk. So they have it all set out of how in each of those areas is it going to move from, we're working together to separating, or how are we going to work together during this transition period?
Do you know if the fire and EMS are already separated?
Yes, fire is.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of other departments that would be shared now that might not be.
Highway.
May I interject? I'm sorry, this is Representative Houghton. So just a couple quick, and I just know this because I was a trustee. So fire has always been separate. Village has their own, the town has their own. EMS is a third party. Police has been shared since 1980, and there is an agreement going forward for another 10 years of sharing. Highway has always been separated. We did do a consolidation, but we will be separating those back out, and they will remain separate. The departments have always, though they've worked together, they've always been separate departments.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions or concerns? I'm ready to vote. Oh, all right.
I can be ready to vote. So this is just a visual question. Essex Junction, which is going to become Essex City, is that sort of what I think it was, the 5 corners area?
Yeah.
I just want to get a sense of what we're
Yes,
talking
and
about.
there's more to it than 5 corners, but yes, like that's.
But I know it
is,
is
and
place
then
like
they
it's
go
a
circle. Yes,
And is that where Global Foundries is?
yes, yeah, so it's that area of it.
Just
More
wondering.
importantly, is it where the train station is, because it's because of the train, it's called the junction.
Exactly, yes, all of those things are true.
And the train station is right there too?
Yeah.
So, and remind us the population of the city.
I'm gonna have to ask my senior rep, I wanna say it's 11,000 something.
Yeah, it's about 11,000. It is pretty even between the town and the village. They both have close to 11,000.
It'll become it's one of the biggest cities in the state then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
next to Burlington, aren't you number 2?
I believe so.
I think so.
South Burlington might be a little bit.
With this divide, South Burlington. Yes.
Right.
Well, this divides Essex. Yeah,
And this doesn't,
no, I mean, this now becomes Essex City, the city of Essex, and the town of Essex.
yeah.
Okay, I will move that we vote out H 491 with no amendments favorably.
I just want to celebrate all the hard work of
yeah,
this
there we go.
community. I'm sorry to miss some of this, but it's been a long time coming, and we're happy to be another milestone on this journey to getting this through the legislature.
You're here. Exciting.
So, okay, should I do the roll?
You want to-
Senator Clarkson.
Yeah, what are we gonna do to celebrate? Maybe I need some champagne first.
No, I
yes.
think we need to just
The answer
vote
is yes.
so we can get on to our next issue because we're already 10 minutes late. Okay.
Was that a yes?
Yes, I
Okay,
said,
okay, Senator Colin Moore,
Yes.
Senator Polina,
Yes.
myself, Senator Ron Hinsdale, yes, Senator White,
Yes.
5-0-0.
Thank you all so much. We'll invite you to the celebration. We'll have a celebration.
we're ready. We're ready. We have the forks and the plates.
Thank you, appreciate it very much.
Well,
Thank you.
The two of
thank
should-
you guys. Lots of hard work and too many votes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
our reporter is?
You're shipment.
I was trying to point in this direction, but sure, yes, I'm happy.
Okay.
This one should be.
Yeah, right?
Well, I know, you should never say that.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
getting up and saying, this is
Just
small,
gotta
whatever.
summarize it, Very good.
But
Okay.
so we're gonna go to,
Yep.
Several people in the waiting room.
So I can actually tell you what the population.
oh yeah, I'd say those two.
Oh, did
It's
that,
22 and change.
it's 22 total, but I just didn't know how many were in the city.
Oh, in the city, I think it's 11 or 12.
The room?
Yes.
Yeah,
We did lose
yeah.
some time.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I have to remind you, I have to go up at 2:30 to do, State House, 173 upstairs.
Okay. So we are doing, it's 7:08, is that the number?
Mhm.
708.
Okay, there it is. Okay.
Wow.
Jeez.
Have a few people.
Wow.
Sarah's there. Well, that's
Wow.
good. It's always a good day when Sarah's present.
All right, so, where were we, committee? We heard from, is there anybody on here that
We
we?
haven't heard from Brian Fine, and we,
Soraya. Soraya Hightower.
Uh-huh,
and Zariah.
She's
So we were poised to hear from Zariah, and remember, we had to cut it off, and then we need to hear from Brian. I think those were the.
Well, there's some new folks too.
yes, Lisa Black, we didn't hear from it, Peter Tucker.
Peter Tucker and Joan Shannon.
And who? She's not on this. Joan, Joan isn't here.
Oh, but she's here.
Got it. You're here.
Okay, we're going to, start with, Soraya, where are you? There you are. Would you
Hi,
like?
can you all hear me?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can hear you, thank you. Would you like to, weigh in on this?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Hi, my name is Soraya Hightower. I'm the Ward 1 City Councilor in Burlington and appreciate you all taking the time. And I'm sorry I'm not on video. I've got kind of a slow connection, so I'm choosing you hopefully being able to hear me over being able to see me. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the City Council took a pretty collaborative approach on this charter change. It went through several committees. So it started, as I'm sure you've heard from Sarah Carpenter, and CDNR, went to charter change, went back to CDNR. So it was really in committee for a very long time and was pretty wildly publicized at the same time. So the media picked up on it and there were a few articles written on it. We took a pretty collaborative approach, not least because, as I'm sure many of you know, Burlington tried to pass this a couple decades ago unsuccessfully, and we didn't want to see the same thing happen again. So we really tried to find something that would work for everyone, and that for landlords who are small landlords or who are currently really treating their tenants fairly, that it wouldn't have to change how they're operating right now. And with that, I know near the end of last week, the discussion was turning to how informed the voters were. And I want to say, I think voters were pretty informed on this one, not least because of the media attention, but also there was a pretty big campaign that went out against the just cause eviction charter. So there were a few tens of thousands of dollars spent on information against it. You know, every resident got at least one mailing, and I think multiples on this, and folks still really voted for it. I think there was a lot of excitement from voters who were certainly informed on this issue. So yeah, I just really, I think one of the things that my constituents certainly have been most excited about in the last years has been this passing. And it's one of the true bipartisan things that we've been able to pass in the last 2 years. So I really hope you all will consider this.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions for Soraya? Am I pronouncing your name right? Okay.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you.
The answer for you.
So we'll move to Brian Pine.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm Brian Pine. I serve as the director of the City of Burlington's Community and Economic Development Office. Prior to that, my career has revolved around housing, community development, economic development, and finance. I would just add that I was a city councilor in the 1990s and returned to the city council again in 2018 and left last June to take this position as the director of the department, where I served as one of the assistant directors from 1996 until 2015. Somewhat parenthetically, I would add that I am the owner of a rental duplex that is next door to the house that I live in and live with my wife and where we've raised our kids. I would provide a little bit of both recent history and some historical context that I think is helpful for you as the policymakers who are considering our charter change. The Mayor's Housing Summit in 2019 focused primarily on the development of new housing by removing barriers and raising new funding sources. At that time, housing activists and advocates really called attention to the need to expand and increase protections for renters, even while or sort of paired with the new housing that is being developed, under the notion or guided by the notion that developing new units is critical to addressing the housing challenges we face. But there's also people who live in our community today who need protections in order to ensure that they have a level of housing stability and housing security that is good for lots of important outcomes that we all would like to see. And so I think that's an important piece here to understand sort of when and where this came up more recently. And Burlington has historically advanced for at least the last 40 years, a broad housing agenda, and the goals in that agenda have been the three P's, we like to say, and those P's are production of new housing, both affordable and market rate housing, preservation of the existing affordable housing stock, and lastly, and perhaps most relevant to this topic, is protection for those who are vulnerable in our housing market. The Community Development Neighborhood Revitalization Committee that I chaired for the 3 years most recently that I served on the council sought help from housing advocates and activists to put together, perform some research, and to deliver some material for the committee's use. And that policy research was also augmented by the council, individual councilors contracting with a research assistant who gathered policies in place in other jurisdictions and helped us create a real matrix of comparison policies that are in effect across the country. Our committee met about a dozen times over a 1-year period, and the city council charter change committee also met several times on this topic. And the council finally voted in December of 2020 by a vote of 10-2 in favor of putting this proposal before the voters. followed by a citywide support for the ballot measure, 63% of the voters supporting the charter change measure. And I would just point out that when we proposed a charter change previously, and I can add this because I was involved at that time in 1988, it was actually a 52% opposed, 48% in favor. So I would say that Burlingtonians are very informed on these issues. It wasn't sort of an uninformed public vote, but in fact, I think it was actually more debate and more dialogue around this issue than ever. And as Councilor Hightower mentioned, there was an actual funded campaign that sent multiple mailings to voters, every voter in Burlington, to urge them to reject this. So it wasn't, as some have implied, perhaps a less informed electorate. I think it was quite the opposite. So this came as an idea, honestly, in the mid-1980s from the Mayor's Affordable Housing Task Force. And that task force was comprised of both landlords and tenants, tenant advocates, real estate interests, developers, bankers. Really, the whole gamut was represented on that task force. This was one of their unanimous recommendations that Burlington adopt a just cause eviction control measure. The concept was beginning to catch on in other jurisdictions, New Jersey, namely, and DC and California, but also just to the north, the entire province of Quebec had adopted a policy that was we were attempting to mirror those policies in Burlington. So the idea had been tested and proof of concept had already been underway for some time at that point. And we then more recently, through our research, found that dozens of cities and states have either enacted this measure or are in the process of adopting a similar measure. And there's no real evidence that points to an undue negative outcome or impact on the local housing market. So I think that's a supposition and an assertion, but not in fact proven. There's no data that has pointed to that fact or that assertion. I think many have asked, do we really need this measure to protect tenants from no cause eviction? Sort of the rhetorical question of, is this really a problem, and is a solution like this needed? And I think I would just point out that the sort of dual forces of eviction and the threat of no cause eviction paired with housing discrimination really work together to destabilize housing and undermine long-established housing rights, particularly for tenants of color and tenants with disabilities, and non-binary tenants who face especially challenging conditions in navigating the housing market. And so in this overheated housing market, tenants in our community have really could benefit from this type of protection, really as part of an important social safety net. And the voters of Burlington spoke loud and clear in March of 2021 on this issue. So that's why we're urging your support.
Thank you. Any questions for Brian? Okay, we will then jump to I have too many agendas here from too many days.
And while you're doing that,
Yeah.
Cheryl, you're supposed to be stalling out. Ask Brian, since we have someone who has decades of history in housing, probably to the benefit of whoever reports this on the floor. Are there any lessons learned or things that have come out of the other states and jurisdictions that you mentioned that's worth noting? You know, it sounds like the sky didn't fall, first of all, but anything positive that can be reported out of places that have done this before?
Well, I'm at a disadvantage because I've, since taking this job last June, I've had much less exposure because of my day-to-day responsibilities. But Councilor Carpenter, I believe, continues to kind of research and do her own due diligence on this policy. And across the country, there's, there's really, I even know the small town that I grew up in upstate New York was considering a measure along these lines. So it's a policy that is emerging in different market conditions, but also in different regulatory environments. And so in jurisdictions where you have rent control or rent stabilization, just cause has one flavor, and in communities or jurisdictions that don't have those types market regulations, it has a different flavor and a different approach. And so I think here, in our case, because it's not paired with rent stabilization or rent control, it is, it is a policy that attempts to bring a level of, basic protection, basic security of tenure in a really hot and really volatile market. And that I think is a really important distinction. But if we could certainly, I'm sure we could find more current data if that would benefit the committee.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to jump to Lisa. Are you there, Lisa Black? I see you're there. Great. Thank you. Would you like to weigh in? Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Afternoon. My name is Lisa Black, and today I wanted to tell my story. I believe there is value in it being heard, and I don't tell it for attention or because the timing of the telling will help my current situation, but I tell it for the countless stories that will mirror my own if you don't pass this charter change. I'm a board certified physician assistant, and I still hold active national credentials. I practiced emergency medicine for over 25 years. I did not discriminate against anyone who walked through the ER doors, not homeless, penniless, speechless, mindless, not even anyone who had less. They all bleed the same. My entire professional career, I advocated for the disabled, and when I practiced, I took the weight of that responsibility seriously. My goal today is for you to feel the weight of your responsibility. From 2014 to 2016, I had 10 major surgeries, and I still worked. I became legally disabled in 2016. I'm not on disability to avoid working. I worked my entire life, and I paid my taxes and contributed to Social Security. I'm not on a Section 8 voucher, and I'm proud to fund my housing with the money I earned from my professional career. There is a unique set of challenges tenants with special needs have. General tenants issues may be magnified for a disabled tenant and require higher priority for repair. For example, a single elevator that is non-reliable in a building with no first floor apartments, or a broken heavy door that does not meet code. Even non-functioning appliances, lack of hot water, lack of building security, lack of proactive fire safety measures, and incomplete snow removal cause additional hardships for the disabled. I have lived in my building for 10 months, long enough to watch a pattern established with my landlord. The existing staff and maintenance personnel are undertrained to deal with the tenants with disability needs, which puts tenants in danger through their actions. My landlord knows if anyone is unhappy or complains about the state of their unit, they can evict through no cause, do not renew their lease, and choose from a long line of waiting replacement tenants. The tenants in my building realize we represent money or income for our landlords more than we represent individual lives. As a disabled tenant, this is especially troubling because my needs may require more expense to them. 2 months before moving in, I supplied my landlords 3 medical letters, a permanent Vermont handicapped parking placard, and a verifiable income from 2 disability sources. I signed my lease with my landlord 60 days in advance upon my move-in on April 1st. 6 days later, my father died suddenly and unexpectedly. 12 days later, after my father died, I had another major surgery. I received my specialized care at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, and while recovering, I attempted to focus on returning to Vermont to take refuge in my apartment where I plan to mourn my father and heal, respite that has not yet been realized. At this moment, I have an active HRC investigation against my landlord, who is a mega landlord based in Burlington, for violating my disability rights. Other non-disability complaints will likely be filed to the appropriate courts related to violations of my general tenant rights and landlord's breach of lease and their obligations. This complaint touched on the topics I mentioned earlier in my testimony and included 2 life safety code violations in my apartment alone. Prior to filing the complaint, I attempted to address my concerns with my landlord for 3 months. The lengthy process for HRC investigations, evictions, and other court cases related to rent withholding and landlord accountability make no cause in non-renewal of lease the perfect to landlords to maximize their profits and to the detriment of their tenants. There is incentive to delay delay, obstruct, and interfere with our requests for investigations, inspections, and for them not to complete expensive repairs or make accommodations and modifications. If landlords hold out long enough, they can rid themselves of tenants asserting their basic rights, saving the landlord's money and at the expense of their tenants. My landlord's response to the HRC complaint I filed was that they made a demand to the HRC that I be required to have a doctor of their choosing medically evaluate me to assess my disabilities. As a reminder, I have already met the criteria for the federal government and my private disability company confirming that I am legally disabled. My landlord's demand is humiliating and punitive. Additionally, my landlord has asserted that I'm lying. My lease term ends in May. The HRC investigator and I have not been successful with conciliation attempts amidst the ongoing investigation. My landlord would not volunteer in a building-wide ADA compliance and building code compliance inspection, nor would my landlord agree to attending ADA training. The recorded testimony of all employed persons through the HRC investigation who have met me in person lied to the investigator and said they were not able to notice or recognize any physical disabilities when interacting with me. I have video of our interactions to prove otherwise and a photograph of what my spine looks like that I'm happy to show you. Since filing my complaint, my landlord advised the conciliator that they would not be renewing my lease and suggested that I should keep it in mind while reviewing their insulting settlement offer, which required me to leave my current lease and home prior to the end of my lease and drop all complaints on the matter. Last week, I was served 3 notices of eviction, one by the county sheriff's office knocking at my door. This eviction is a textbook violation of Vermont Statute 9, Commerce and Trade, Chapter 137, for retaliatory behavior and conduct that is prohibited. With an enormous amount of effort required to trudge through redundant, broken, and at times obstructive government systems and bureaucracies, thus far, I have been able to expose violations through the Department of Fire and Safety, who have confirmed many life and fire safety code violations, as well as building and ADA accessible code violations in our building, most of which have yet to be corrected. I would be glad to provide you examples if you wish to ask me about them. They are not minutia. My fire door would be a good one. It is worth noting my landlord already has the federal case record for violating Title III by a separate tenant. When an organization has an ADA violation, there are stipulations. For example, they're required to display that they don't discriminate somewhere on their website. My landlord requires tenants to check a box indicating that they agree that they don't discriminate before they're actually able to submit their rent payment on the online portal, an act I fundamentally disagree with. Organizations and businesses lose their humanity when they have the authority to render a person powerless. Renters are powerless right now, and landlords know it. Landlords are driven by basic business principles like supply and demand and business strategies that allow them to take minimum losses. Redstone is acutely aware of the time delays tenants face to obtain assistance, so they will continue to exploit this weakness in their pursuit of profit. People give up or they lose the race to beat the clock on their lease's expiration date before they have favorable rulings in the pursuit of their justice. And landlords evict, raise the rent, or don't renew these people's leases to avoid justice, relying that tenants will eventually give up in face of the insurmountable struggle. I realize that beyond the rent I pay, I am just an expenditure of time and money. It is evident that the value of my life is less than the value of the rent I give them every month. It's sad. I'm not a drug dealer. I don't sell heroin. I'm not a troublemaker or a bad neighbor. My fellow tenants are part of my support and my family. We have birthday parties for our dogs in the common area. I host a writing group once a month. We feed each other. We have each other's backs. As of May 25th, this is being taken away from me. I try not to take it personally, but how can I not? I want my story to be heard for those that share a similar experience but do not come forward out of fear of being denied a place to live. At this point, I truly don't know what will happen to me or where I will live, but I know I can't carry this story alone anymore. It's dragging me down. I need something good to come from this story. Please protect tenants like me. Systems fall apart when checks and balances are not upheld or enforced. Systems fall apart when there is an egregious power imbalance. We are certainly seeing a collapse of the rental housing system in Vermont, where the current checks and balances are no longer fit for purpose. We need a change in the rules to ensure that the industry works for landlords and for tenants that use their services. Tenants shouldn't have to yield to avoid breaking or being broken. Today, I yield to you, and I ask you to help me and the countless others that share my story by supporting this change. It is beyond time to address the effects of this unprecedented housing crisis. This is impacting so many Vermonters.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. It was, I'm sure, hard for you. It was hard to listen to. So thank you.
I'm sorry about your dad.
Yeah.
Thank you for the privilege.
So any questions, comments? There's not much to say. Thank you.
I would like to note to the chair that Eric Hostrater is the managing partner of the landlord company that leases the rents.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to jump to next. I have on the list Peter Tucker and Joan Shannon.
Great. Thank you, the chair and the committee for inviting us here today to talk about this important topic. I'm Peter Tucker. I am the Director of Advocacy and Public Affairs for the Vermont Association of Realtors. When I moved into this role in the fall of 2020, one of the first calls that I received was from a Burlington broker asking us to get involved in the charter change discussion for Just Cause. Other brokers from Burlington, as well as the Northwest Vermont Realtor Association, reached out to us to ask us for our help in opposing this charter change. We partnered with the National Association of Realtors to do research and develop an issues mobilization campaign on just cause and rent control. And here's what we found. Some of our research was based on a 2019 National Public Radio report on the impact of just cause and rent control in the city of San Francisco. They interviewed housing economists who shed light on some of the unintended consequences of these policies. It's clear that this ordinance will reduce the number of rental properties available in a marketplace. In San Francisco, for the first couple of years, landlords just absorbed and adapted to the impact and followed the rules. However, over time, many landlords or many owners chose to do other things with their properties. They reoccupied for personal use, converted to condominiums for sale, changed use to commercial space, or sold outright. In the ensuing years, the city lost 25% of their rental housing. In a market like Burlington with a vacancy rate around 1%, think of the impact of a 25% reduction in rental housing. This ordinance will reduce market value of rental properties. We're in a housing bubble now, but when the market turns down, rental properties subject to additional restrictions like just cause will be less attractive. There is more risk built in. This ordinance creates consolidation of rental housing with larger landlords. As small and medium-sized landlords choose a different path for their properties, only the large landlords will be left. This ordinance will lead to a deterioration of rental properties. Owners will be less willing and financially able to improve their properties. It will also effectively require this ordinance, which effectively requires perpetual tenancy, erodes the meaning of contract law. When is a contract? And when does it end? The ordinance makes it more difficult to remove problem tenants, potentially causing good tenants to leave. Landlords will have to prove just cause with evidence that is not defined. The ordinance will force landlords to require more restrictive leases and be far more selective in their choice of tenants. They may be making a lifetime decision. Landlords will have to be assured that the tenants will be good partners in their lease. This ordinance discourages new investment in rental housing. Investors will choose communities other than Burlington to invest in rental housing. If you want to address the housing crisis, we need to encourage, not discourage, investment in rental housing. Purchasers of rental properties will have to consider the impact of just cause as part of their real estate transaction. They are not only purchasing a building, they are also assuming a group of tenants that they have not vetted. Just cause rent control will lead to more conflict over what is reasonable rent increase that has to be solved by the courts. And let me be clear, this is absolutely a rent control proposal. The charter change, quote, limits unreasonable rent increases to prevent de facto evictions. This language is vague and unenforceable and will lead to significant litigation. The charter change also states that ordinance shall define what is reasonable, but provides no guidance as to what is reasonable or even who shall define what reasonable is. The definition of reasonable is clearly rent control. Regardless of how reasonable is arrived at, it provides a rent control cap for the city of Burlington. Of potentially greater importance, the definition of reasonable will be the basis for every legal challenge to renewal terms. The charter change as written is vague and will, and already has, opened it to legal challenges. The charter change does not establish what evidence is needed to show just cause. These are just some of the unintended consequences of this proposed ordinance and the reason why the Vermont Association of Realtors, in support of the Northwestern Vermont Association of Realtors, are opposed to this charter change, and we ask the committee to not approve H708. Just cause rent control is a big city concept that doesn't fit in our small state. It's not good public policy, and it should not set precedent for the state. Of greater importance, this is not the solution to the housing crisis. The lack of supply of housing, from rental housing to home ownership, has been severely impacted over the years by overly restrictive zoning and permitting regulations. Less regulation, not more, is the solution to our housing crisis. Just cause rent control will reduce the supply of housing in Burlington and does not address the underlying causes of our housing crisis. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think I'm going to point out something that, unless I misunderstand this charter change, this is a charter change that gives the city council the ability to write an ordinance. And that's why the language is vague and why reasonable isn't defined and stuff, because this isn't the ordinance. This gives them the ability, and I would assume that the city of Burlington would have, it'll probably take them as long to come up with the ordinance as it took them to get the charter change, that it will be, as Zariah pointed out, it will be a collaborative effort. So I just am pointing that out because this is not the ordinance. This is the ability for them to write an ordinance, and they should include these, but it doesn't define. It says they have to address these things, but it doesn't define how. So I just wanted, yeah.
If I could add to that, and I think Brian might be able to respond, there is already a form of rent control in Burlington, and the city council could parallel what they do on this policy to the existing, I think, 12% cap on rent increases. That's my understanding. Brian, don't we already have some form of cap on increases in Burlington?
Senator Ram Hinsdale, we don't actually have a policy in place that caps rents because the General Assembly does not provide for that authority at the local level. So that policy has been debated, and there's been proposals, but it has never been adopted. And I think the distinction here is that reason why it's in the ordinance is that in every jurisdiction, there needs to be some attention paid to the potential loophole that can be created if you don't address it. Otherwise, you can just have egregious rent increases as a way to simply, like it says, de facto eviction. But that is not, we don't currently have a policy.
And I actually like this even better now, because I always thought we had that in place in Burlington. I think that makes sense for long-term tenants.
So, oh, yes.
Yeah, well, I just want to, sort of a question, but a statement as well. First of all, I agree with what the chair said about this just being empowering legislation to allow the city council to develop a system. But when I look at the bill, unless I'm reading it wrong, mostly what it talks about is things that do represent just cause. And also the buildings that would be exempt from the just cause policy. So when I read this, I'm trying to, I read it, and I'm looking for the parts that tell me what just cause actually is. And what I'm hearing is what just cause is not. So I just feel like the legislation is pretty clear on what's not, what will be exempt from the policy. Much more vague is what exactly comes under the policy, which gives the city council the ability to flesh that out.
So I'm going to jump to Joan Shannon. I see you are, there you are.
I am here.
Thank you. Would you like to weigh in on this?
Yes, I would. And thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Good afternoon. My name is Joan Shannon, and I'm a Burlington City Councilor since 2003. I was chair of the Charter Change Committee when this proposal came forward. And I appreciate having this opportunity to speak with you about my concerns with the just cause evictions charter change. Let me first disclose to you some of my biases. I am a property owner of 3 rental units in Burlington. I own the duplex next door to me, which we purchased after finding needles in the yard and out of concern for our family, our neighbor's family, and the whole neighborhood. I own a condo, which we bought in an effort to help out a family that was losing their housing due to the sale of the property where they lived. I fully appreciate the need for tenant protections and regulations on property owners. We have not managed our property to make money, but rather to provide decent and affordable housing for families with a benefit to us of appreciation. I have always had Section 8 tenants, and I'm a big fan of the program. I've taken many chances on many people. I am currently housing 4 Afghan refugees. I've worked with families who could not afford to pay rent, resulting in $8,000 of arrears with one tenant that I continued to work with. I have deep sympathy for our tenants who fall on hard times and am committed to helping them through those hard times. We try to be property owners that support our tenants and our neighbors. I'm not a libertarian, and any developer or landlord in Burlington will definitely tell you I'm not a property rights kind of gal. I believe in regulation, and I believe owning property in our city is a privilege, and with that privilege comes responsibilities. I recently joined my progressive colleagues in support of limiting short-term rentals, which put me at odds with my Democratic colleagues and the mayor. But I feel strongly that that's an important effort in preserving affordable housing in our community. I'm also a realtor, but I also often disagree with our lobbyists, and I do not represent their interests, nor do I agree with the literature that they sent out to voters on this issue. I will never defend predatory or retaliatory landlords or those that fail to address the human needs of tenants. That's not why I'm here. I appreciate and respect the goals of the advocates of this proposal. My impression of advocacy on both sides was that neither were particularly effective in explaining the details of the ordinance, and much of it was inaccurate or misleading. I listened to your last meeting, and 2 things struck me about what I heard from all of you. The first is that there is some question about whether or not the legislature should have a role in approving charter changes. If the voters of Burlington are in favor, it's a democracy and they should get what they've asked for. The second is the difficulty with which you've struggled to understand exactly what this charter change means and the nuances within the words. Senator Polina actually just mentioned another thing I hadn't heard before, which is the lack of specificity about what is just cause. And I think actually that the version that has come from the House does explicitly say what is just cause. First, I'd like to review the language that the voters voted on and the impression of the average voter. Second, I will dig deeper into the reality of the details and consequences of this charter change. And lastly, consider why the legislature should consider modifying the proposal or not moving it forward. The question before the voters was, shall the charter of the city of Burlington, Acts of 1949, number 298, as amended, be further amended to give the city council the power to provide by ordinance protections for the residential tenants from evictions without just cause by adopting and adding a new section 4866 to read as follows. It then proceeds with the language that this committee, as well as our city council, has spent many hours trying to understand. I'd ask each of you to consider, if you were an average voter, how would you read that language? Quote, protections for residential tenants from evictions without just cause. It's pretty hard to say no to that, is it not? If that's all I knew, my vote would be yes. But in the second paragraph is the clause that brings concern if you decipher it. And I would note it took some effort for this committee to understand this part. Such ordinance shall exclude from just cause the expiration of a rental agreement as sole grounds for termination of tenancy. This is then followed by exemptions from the exclusion. It's pretty hard to follow, even for those of us who do this on a very regular basis. This proposal came to the council floor from the Charter Change Committee, which I chair. The members of the CDNR committee, whom you've heard from here, chaired by Councilor Carpenter, didn't like the language that came out of the Charter Change Committee. Neither did I, for that matter. And they proposed a strike all amendment on the council floor. But the amendment they offered didn't say what they thought it said. And we spent 2 hours wordsmithing, otherwise known as sausage making, on the council floor. Councilor Mason, who is the only attorney on our city council, offered an amendment to strike the language regarding, quote, excluding from just cause the expiration of a rental agreement, and that section that followed. This amendment failed. I would argue this is the section of the proposal that has been hard for committee members to grasp, as well as for voters. This language means we are not just talking about evictions, but also about expiration of leases. If no one has to leave, it's going to be very difficult to plan for your next tenant. While you've heard that many other communities have similar regulations, what has not been considered by any legislative body is the bigger picture of evictions in Vermont in comparison with those other communities. Vermont is rated by all the sources that I could find as the #1 most tenant-friendly state. It's already the hardest state to get an eviction. That's great. I think we should be tenant friendly. And as you know, Burlington already has many regulations that protect tenants even more than the state of Vermont. But this adds permanent tenancy and rent control on top of our already stringent regulations. Permanent tenancy. Unless you can prove a violation of the lease or one of the other just causes specified, you must renew the lease. In fact, I believe this would apply even to a squatter in your house that never had permission to be there, but is paying rent. Here is some of the testimony we heard in the Charter Change Committee that went unaddressed in this proposal. One tenant sexually assaulted the child of another tenant. The victim did not want to testify against the assailant. Without just cause, the property owner has the right to not renew the lease with the perpetrator. With just cause, the property owner will not be able to end the tenancy of the perpetrator, and the victim will likely have to leave or continue living next to this perpetrator. A female property owner was sexually harassed regularly by her tenant and did not feel comfortable entering the property. But in this case, she would still be required to renew the lease. Numerous tenants with a variety of disruptive behaviors, intimidating other tenants, will get their leases renewed. An owner of 4 units who took a chance on someone with a criminal record ended up with 2 squatters in the house, drug dealing, and an array of unwelcome inhabitants that created an unrentable environment in the other units, despite our housing shortage. The landlord almost lost the building in his effort to evict squatters and the original problem tenant. College students make housing plans 1 year in advance. What happens if the previous tenant decides not to move out? They must be offered renewals and somebody with well-laid plans gets shut out. Known drug dealers cannot be removed without due process and presumably a conviction. This provision would have impacted me personally, as I did not renew the lease of a drug dealer. And fortunately for the neighbor with 2 kids who shared the building and the yard where the needles were found, I did not have to wait for a conviction. Both families were on Section 8. A new family on Section 8 then moved into the former home of the drug dealer. It wasn't sitting empty. It benefited a wonderful tenant who lived there for more than 10 years. Just cause does not only protect good tenants, it protects bad tenants and can harm good tenants in the same building. It protects squatters. Good tenants are gold to property owners. Good tenants are only evicted under terms which are actually exemptions. I should not say only, but I would say most often evicted under the terms which are actually exemptions to just cause, including moving a family member in, the sale of a property, renovation, etc. These are all evictions. It doesn't get at the reasons why really many good tenants are losing their housing. These are heartbreaking situations, but they are not protected by this charter change. Good tenants are not the ones being protected here. With regards to rent control, it is this line that is particularly concerning. It's the triple I. Limit unreasonable rent increases to prevent de facto evictions or non-renewals, although this shall not be construed to limit rents beyond the purpose of preventing individual evictions. When I asked on the council floor how reasonable rent increases would be determined, I was told it would be on a case-by-case basis. The plain language of the text tells us the amount a property owner can increase rent is based on whether or not the particular tenant can afford the increase. The purpose of the limitation is preventing individual evictions. Market rates and costs are not mentioned. Simply bringing the rent up to what others in the building are paying could be deemed unreasonable if the tenant can't afford to pay it and would have to leave. While I'm not a supporter of rent control, I would argue that a known amount of rent limitation would be preferable than this unknown case-by-case, highly litigious construct. Who will preside over this due process? Our courts. And that brings me to the impacts on the state of Vermont. The state interests in this include the courts favoring large landlords over small landlords, and the overall impact of fewer landlords willing to take risks on our most vulnerable tenants. Certainly, the state should be considering how this charter change might impact our already backlogged court system. Using the courts to litigate rent increases and a more cumbersome eviction process will further burden the system. There's a landlord in Burlington who owns about 25 units. He was charging $850 a month for 2-bedroom apartments. He raised the rent to $1,200 after reappraisal. When looking at the rent increase on a case-by-case basis, will it be allowed? At $1,200 a month, he's probably 50% under market rent, but it's a 30% rent increase. If this is unaffordable to some tenants, but affordable to others, is it allowed for some and not others? The court will decide this and all the other disparate cases of rent increases. Some mom and pop landlords will likely sell out to larger or corporate landlords, leading to fewer landlords willing to take a chance on our vulnerable community members. Many large private or corporate landlords have fiduciary responsibilities to passive investors. They have strict rules for applicants, and they do not take chances the way small landlords do. Fewer landlords willing to take chances on those with records of incarceration, drug use, poor payment histories, or immigrants with no history at all. This is counter to the interest of many state programs, and Burlington provides more rental housing than any other community in the state, as far as I'm aware. I've talked to several caseworkers in organizations that work to find people housing, and their perspective is quite different than that of legal aid and the larger federally funded housing providers. But you won't hear from them unless you ask, and they likely aren't going to want to risk speaking publicly. But please talk to them. Burlington has approximately 2,000 units operated with support of federal funds, which are subject to the rules similar to what is being proposed. You have heard Councilor Carpenter tell you about the hundreds of units she has managed with no ill effects. I will tell you that managing federally subsidized housing on a large scale with staff and legal representation is a world away from the mom and pop landlords that will be impacted by this measure. This is creating an environment that is so unfriendly. Many people are converting their long-term rentals into short-term rentals, where provisions such as the proposed won't apply. According to data provided by the City of Burlington, in 2019, we had more than 400 short-term rentals. About 75% of them are whole unit rentals, and the market for short-term rentals continues to grow. Most of these units were previously housing units. Now they're lodging units. We have a housing crisis in Vermont, and it's not limited to Burlington. I read today that Woodstock is considering offering short-term rental operators $3,000 to enter into one-year leases. The housing crisis is a statewide economic development crisis. For me, the risks you are asking a property owner to take on with just cause evictions are far greater than the $3,000. And short-term rentals are increasingly looking like a better option than long-term rentals. While I agree that no one should be thrown out of their housing without just cause, I strongly disagree that this charter change accomplishes that, and I believe it will be a chilling effect on the rental market, but especially for those that need us to take a chance on them. Good tenants will continue to lose their housing through the list of exclusions. Bad tenants will be protected by a requirement that they be given a lease unless their violation can be proven in court. The most vulnerable won't get evicted from housing because those that don't have perfect rental histories and good credit will have even less of a chance of finding housing than they do today. Ask those that are doing the job of finding housing for vulnerable community members. The eviction process in other jurisdictions with just cause evictions is typically 1 to 3 months. In Vermont, it's 6 months. It could be longer. You cannot look at this in isolation of other regulations when making comparisons with other communities that have just cause evictions. At the neighborhood planning assemblies in Burlington, voters were told by lobbyists and supporters that this charter change would protect good tenants. I don't believe that is a true statement. They were also told this would support small landlords and discourage large landlords. I also don't think that that's true. Voters support tenant protections from evictions without just cause, but they don't know that it includes permanent tenancy, arbitrary rent control, and an exclusion for most of the reasons good tenants have to move out. As far as the collaborative effort of the council, when it started in the CDNR committee, it was brought forward by tenant advocate groups, and I think that's exactly what they should be doing. But there was not any outreach to the landlords. When it came to the charter change committee, we have a landlord registry here. So I had asked that our landlords be notified of the discussion. And for that, I was attacked by the tenant advocacy groups for reaching out to landlords. Landlords did come to the charter change committee, but I can't say that they were listened to. And I don't feel like this was a terribly collaborative process. I'll leave it at that. And I thank you for your time, and I appreciate the difficulty of the task before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Keisha, do you have?
I do see Lisa's hand.
Yep.
You want me to?
Yeah, we go first and then.
Okay. Lisa, I imagine you have something to say about this. I'll try to get some legal answers around this first, because I feel like there was a lot there, and I Counselor Shannon. I just took some notes because we covered a lot of ground, and I wonder, I feel like I want to call on our legal counsel, Tucker, Brian, and maybe Devin from Legal Aid, just to run through some of what we just heard, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. So let's hear what Lisa has to say.
Yeah,
first,
let's
and
do
then-
that. That's
and
great.
then, Lisa, did you have a comment? I think you're muted.
Yes, can you hear me? I'm sorry. At first, just a quick statement, and then I guess a question for the committee and the other experts on the line, perhaps. The statement that I want to make is that I don't believe this is about landlords taking chances on drug dealers, sexual offenders, people who use needles, people who don't pay their bills. I think the majority of the people that are represented by this bill are more so people like the disabled. I would love to know the percentage of all the dramatic examples of the people and the landlords give for the reasons why this protection to give a cause is being asked for. And then my question is to the committee and the experts is, what can be done to liaise when you're in the process of waiting for a prolonged support from, say, the Human Rights Commission, et cetera? For example, my landlord, who doesn't appear to be on the line anymore, which is quite interesting, I have not been able to liaise with him, Eric Hoekstra. In fact, when he introduces himself as a member of the Burlington Housing Alliance, when he's in fact the managing partner of Redstone Property Management, my landlord. And I find that interesting that he doesn't identify himself to the committee as the mega landlord manager that he is. And I just have been unsuccessful in every productive thing I've tried. So the point is that going through the processes with the HRC, et cetera, and doing everything abiding by the law and the processes, I am going to be evicted before my investigation is done and conciliations have failed. So if this were to pass, I guess I would ask you all to explain or help me understand how this would benefit someone like me.
Okay, yeah, and that would be legal. In your particular case, I don't think it would benefit you because it is not it wouldn't be retroactive. I mean,
Understood. So
yeah.
all I'm saying is landlords, I would love to know the percentage of landlords who are getting away with evicting people who are not heroin dealers and not squatters and sexual assailants, but in disabled people who have a door that is 7 pounds over the weight limit for basic building code and can't open their door. And they ask for help for 10 months. And the response from the landlord is obstruction, obstruction, delay, and then eviction for no cause.
Yes, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and
that's Redstone, who is the biggest landlord in Burlington.
Yeah.
Who sued Burlington.
Right. We appreciate that, Lisa. And Devin, in our last hearing, before you were invited, not saying you missed anything of your own intent, Devin talked to us about how much no cause evictions are up due to things like non-payment of rent and other just non-causes, essentially.
Understood. I mean, but I paid my rent and I'm a good tenant and I don't bother anyone. And the only thing I have after 30 years of service in an emergency department treating all kinds of people is a disability that I had no control over. And I'm going to be on the street homeless at the end of May. And this passing this would prevent it.
Right. No, Lisa, we really appreciate you testifying and know that you're not even doing it to help your own situation, and we really feel the situation. And I can see why the last testimony sort of triggered a lot of strong feelings of response. And I think we should take a minute to get underneath some of them and also recognize what the chair said before, which is, I hope the Burlington City Council and the Charter Committee take, or whoever the governing body will be that ultimately brings stakeholders together to deal with this, address some of these things that, will need to be addressed in more detail that make sense for us to do as a group. I had some questions based on what Councilor Shannon said, because I think we should. I have a bill.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, I didn't think this was gonna take as long as it did. Yeah, what committee, what do you want to do here? We are at 3:15, we're scheduled to go to something else.
What is this?
It is, and people are already here. It's an act relating to retirement allowance for interim teachers. So we were scheduled for a break at 3 and then come back at 3:15. So should we continue? I think this conversation might get a little longer. Should we reschedule it for next week?
I don't think so.
Okay. I think that's what we'll do, is we'll reschedule this conversation for next week, because I think some committee members have more questions than we can get in the next 2.5 minutes.
And we've heard strong testimony from both sides.
Yeah.
It's worth letting some of it sink in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll try to list out, some of the concerns that I think I'm hearing, and hopefully between Brian and others, we can get answers.
Yeah.
Really, I do think so many of these questions have to lie with the body that ultimately adds the detail to this. But I also just want to say, I think there's already a lot of ways that squatters are or are not dealt with in Burlington. There's, I think, other issues going on with rent control and why someone would increase so much, by 33% their rents because of the valuation issue that came up in Burlington. I don't believe that if there's major crime or assault happening, that someone would want to wait until a non-renewal period that could be 6 to 8 months away. So, I just think there's a lot to unpack here that is much bigger than this particular charter change before us about what was just said. And I just want to say that before we sort of take a pause on this until next week.
Good, thank you. And so you'll all get invitations as soon as we get the, Gail and I will be doing the schedule for next week tomorrow, and you'll all get an invitation to rejoin us if you would like. And thank you very much, all of you, for bringing your stories here.